Thanks very much, Chris. And perhaps I thought about it. Another word for acceptance is also happiness. In fact, Chris is also talking about what's making us happy. Happiness could be another word of accept. And what also makes us happy, at least it makes me happy, when I also get some detailed information about what in fact is the environmental impact of meat or plant meat or slaughter-free meat. I like that name. That also adds to my feeling of happiness, just besides taste and texture. And believe it or not, we have a woman in our midst who is coming from the happiest country in the world. The day before yesterday, Finland was rewarded as the people in Finland, living in Finland, are the happiest people in the world. And I met you just during the break, and you seemed to me as a very happy person. I'm talking about Dr. Hanna Tuomisto. She is an associate professor at the Helsinki Institute of Sustainable Science, and she's going to tell us just about the state of the art of the environmental impact also of cultured meat. A big hand, please, for Dr. Hanna Tuomisto.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. So I'm at associate professor in sustainable food systems at the University of Helsinki, and I'm building my research group. And in a few months, I will have 9 people working with me in these questions. So there is a lot of new things coming up soon, hopefully. But today I'm going to talk about the current state of the art, the current research about the environmental impacts of cultured meat. But let's start by looking at the contribution of agriculture to the environmental change. And in this figure, you can see the black dots that show the contribution of agriculture to these 9 planetary boundaries. And here you can see that especially in terms of biodiversity loss and phosphorus and nitrogen flows and land system change, agriculture is playing a big role, and also in fresh water use. And then when we look at the contribution of food systems to the greenhouse gas emissions, it has been estimated that the whole food system accounts about 20% to 30% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. But here also you can see that the agricultural part, so the direct emissions from agriculture, and also the indirect emissions, which means land use change, so deforestation due to clearing land for agricultural land. This is the major contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions of food systems. So what happens before farming, producing the fertilizers and pesticides and energy, and also what happens after the farm, so the processing, transportation, retail, consumption, these have a smaller role in the total greenhouse gas emissions of food systems. And if you look at livestock production, it has been estimated that the livestock alone contributes about 15% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions globally. And in water use, livestock production is about 30% of all total water use, and agriculture in general contributes about or over 90% of water use. And land use change, like I already mentioned, lots of deforestation, especially in the Amazon area, is due to clearing forest for feed production, pasture land, and soya bean production for feed. But it's not all about livestock, but also if we think about fish consumption is causing decline of fish stocks. Many of these popular fish species that we like to consume are declining in many areas. So something needs to be done, and whether cultured meat could be then the solution is the interest of my research. And so here you can see the carbon footprint of different foods, and you can see that beef and lamb has the highest carbon footprint compared to other livestock and vegetarian products or fruits and vegetables and cereals, legumes. They all have a very low carbon footprint per kilogram of product compared to livestock products. And the reason why beef and lamb are so much higher compared to the other livestock products is the fact that they are ruminants, which means that during the enteric fermentation, the digestion process, they produce methane, which is a strong greenhouse gas. Whereas then the monogastric animals like pork and chicken, they don't produce this methane during the digestion process, but they consume similar food or feed that we could actually eat directly. So chicken and pigs, they eat cereals and legumes that we could also eat. And here I have also put the greenhouse gas emissions of cultured meat based on the current research. I will go into these papers in more detailed now. So the first paper that I published in 2011 was based on, of course, in that time there were not very many people working on cultured meat yet. So I was maybe one of the first people who actually started to think about what would be cultured meat production in large scale. And so then, of course, there wasn't much data available how the cultured meat production could look like in the large scale. But here I collaborated with Joost Teixeira de Matos from the University of Amsterdam, who was developing cyanobacteria-based cultured media, so feeding the meat cells with cyanobacteria, which is a blue-green algae, which is very efficient organisms. It has a high biomass yield per unit of land area. So that's why these very positive results for cultured meat, greenhouse gas emissions, land use and water use were substantially lower compared to any livestock meat, whereas then energy use was higher than for poultry production. But now when we look at these kind of results, we have to, of course, remember that so this energy use here, it includes only industrial energy, so electricity and gas and oil. So it doesn't include the energy that livestock gets from the feed. And especially because the land use is so much lower in cultured meat production, then we could think about how this land area that would be released from agriculture could be used. So some of that land area could be used for producing sustainable energy, maybe solar panels or some bioenergy. But so this 2011 paper, these are really kind of first estimates, and since then I started to collaborate with Marianne Ellis from the University of Bath, who is a chemical engineer specialized in designing bioreactors. And this 2014 paper presented some of the early findings of our collaboration, which is actually still continuing, and we have now a draft that we are still improving and hoping to publish new results later this year. So I'm not showing the results of that paper today, unfortunately. But so in this 2014 paper, we looked at different type of bioreactor. So in the first paper, we had a stirred tank bioreactor, whereas here Marianne Ellis modeled the energy use for hollow fiber bioreactor. And also we looked at different ingredients for the growth medium. So in addition to cyanobacteria, we also looked at wheat and corn. And then also we had a slightly different water footprint method than in the first paper, because in the first paper we included also rainwater, but in this second paper we only included extracted water, so groundwater and surface water. So then that explains why the results look a little bit different. So the energy use was now actually higher than for beef production, and also the water footprint was slightly higher compared to poultry production, but the greenhouse gas emissions and land use was still lower. And here in this comparison, you can see, so those previous figures were per unit of product, so per kilogram of product. But then, of course, different products have different nutritional content. So then here I'm comparing per unit of protein. And here you can see also the comparison of cultured meat with meat substitutes, insects, pulses, and spirulina, which is the cyanobacteria, so the blue-green algae. And so then, of course, when we look at this kind of comparison, one that we would need to remember that the cultured meat product that we are looking at here, it's not a steak. So it's quite different than what beef or livestock meat would be. So the system that we modeled here, the output of the product is just basically loose, soft cell mass that could be used as an ingredient in sausages or something like that. So then, of course, if we continue processing or if we continue the cultured meat production process and want to get some kind of bigger tissue or steak, then the environmental impact would also be higher. And so in terms of energy use, here again, the cultured meat, there is also uncertainty range taken into account here. So there is a big uncertainty what the energy use would be. But here you can see that also the fish is quite high in some cases, but that this includes also seafood. So some of the seafood, it's really energy intensive to harvest. And then if we look at land use, so here cultured meat, it depends on what the source of the feedstock for the growth medium is. So if it's a cyanobacteria, then the impact is very low, but if it's something agriculture-based, then it's higher. And so this is a recent study that we published last year with my co-authors, where we looked at the environmental impacts of different protein sources per unit of different micronutrients. And this is an interesting aspect in a way that even though cultured meat, at least the first products, they might not be similar to meat in terms of texture or taste, then we have always the question that, okay, then wouldn't it be same if we would eat just plants? But one of the benefits of cultured meat in that case could be the nutritional content. So if the protein content and digestibility is better than from the plant-based alternatives, that could be one reason to use cultured meat. And then this is another study by Sergis Metana, who then looked at many different environmental impact categories and then summed them up to a single score. And here you can see that the cultured meat was really high. But you should also notice that, there was no beef as a comparison. So there is only chicken, dairy-based proteins, and insects, and mycoprotein. So there is no beef as a comparison. And what he did, he basically used data from my 2011 paper and then changed the data for the cyanobacteria production. So then his results for the cyanobacteria production were higher than mine. So that's why it is so high in this paper. And then another LCA, very detailed LCA, was published by Caroline Matic in 2015. This is based on a US system. So here she compared the impacts. This in vitro prior study is my 2011 paper. So the energy use in her study was much higher compared to my paper, and also the global warming potential. Here you can also see that half of the energy use and also the greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of the growth medium and half from the running the bioreactor. And the reasons why these results were so much higher compared to my previous study was partly due to the different growth medium. She used this standard growth medium that is currently used for culturing cells, mammalian cells. And then also she included cleaning of the bioreactor with steam, and the steam cleaning has very high energy use. And also some of the reason for the higher greenhouse gas emissions is the fact that the production took place in the US, where the electricity mix includes a lot of fossil-based energy sources. And she included also eutrophication potential, which is eutrophication is caused by nutrient phosphorus and nitrogen leaching to the waterways and increased growth of plants, water plants, and algae. So here this paper found that I didn't include it, so that's why there is no data in this part. But so this study found that the eutrophication potential of cultured meat was much lower, especially compared to beef and pork. And then there was this new study just published about a month ago by a group in Oxford. And so what they did, this has received some media attention recently, and that's why I wanted to a little bit explain what these results actually mean. So they looked at 1,000-year time frame. They used data for cultured meat from my study, so my 11 paper, and also the 2014 paper, and then the highest one is from the Caroline Mattick's paper. And then there are the Midwest USA, Brazil, and Sweden. These are beef production, so just livestock beef production systems in those countries. And then they looked at what happens in the global warming effect of these different products. And so they found that if we take long enough time frame, then actually cultured meat can have higher global warming effect than beef. And this is because beef production has more methane emissions, whereas cultured meat production mainly produces CO2. And methane, it has global warming effect only 12 years, and after that, whereas CO2 continues warming as long as it stays in the atmosphere, or as long as if we capture it back by growing trees or something like that. So then basically my argument to this is that, okay, we are more interested what happens during the next few decades. So 1,000 years is so long time frame that we don't really know how the world would look like in 1,000 years anyway. And also CO2 we can actually capture back by growing more trees or using other vegetation. But yeah, this is an interesting different approach of looking at these kind of issues. So then just quickly to conclude, so there is a high uncertainty, of course, in the environmental impacts of cultured meat, because we don't yet have any large-scale facilities that we could measure. And of course also there is no one way of producing cultured meat, but each system would have different impact. So really the major sources of the uncertainty are that what the growth medium would consist of, what would be the bioreactor design and the process, the scaffold, materials, and then these are really the key factors as well when companies are developing cultured meat to take into account, and also the way how we look at the environmental impacts, what scale we use. Do we take into account also the co-products of livestock? So livestock produces also leather and pet food and all sorts of chemicals. So we should also consider how those would be produced if we don't have livestock. And then look at different scales, how much cultured meat actually can replace meat production after all. And then also include other environmental impact categories in the assessment. Thank you.
Perfect, Hanna. Thank you very much. And let's hope that also future research is also based on actual data. So for the actual that come from actual production of cultured meat. Eh? So it's not just the theory, but also the practice that we can work from. Time for one question. Laurens, I'll give you the mic. I'll hold the mic for you, if you don't mind.
Hi, thanks a lot for the interesting talk. What I'm interested in as well is what happens with the waste, because in cultured meat you probably have waste as well from media, and is that taken into account in the LCA studies as well? And
yeah, so now in the new study that we are working on with Marian Ellis and Scott Allen, we are modeling, or they have modeled this kind of system that recycles the growth media. So then that would avoid using the waste, but otherwise, yeah, there is always some waste water or the waste media going out of the system, and that's taken into account in the assessments as well.
Okay, thank you again, once again, Dr. Hanna Tuomisto from the University of Helsinki.